Anyway, I want to officially welcome you to the virtual Pasadena Senior Center and our Cultural Thursdays program. This is basically a grab bag of all sorts of arts and culture stuff that is hopefully of interest to you as well as an interest to all of us. So the Pasadena Senior Center, for those of you who are new to us, is a recreation and resource center. We were founded in 1960. We're an independent nonprofit organization that is donor and member supported. I encourage you to check out the many online classes and programs that we have scheduled, as well as lots and lots of resources for seniors in the Pasadena area. Check out our programs at pasadena-seniorcenter.org. You can also sign up there for weekly emails. If you're not already on our email list, it's the best way to keep updated on programs and classes and new information that we add to our website all the time. I just want to let you know a little bit about what's coming up on Cultural Thursdays. So we have a full slate of February Thursdays. We start off on February 4th with a history of Valentine's Day. And just lots of fun stuff with Eleanor Schrader, who's just a wonderful lecturer with all sorts of great history. On February 11th, Bob and Don will be back with us for a program on Rodgers and Hammerstein, and they're always wonderful. If you haven't ever caught one of their shows, pianist and singer, and the whole biography of the composers, really great. February 18th, we're going to be celebrating Chinese New Year. That is the coming year of the ox, and gonna have stories and I think some videos. Irene Young is going to be our basically tour guide for festivities of Chinese New Year. And then on February 25th, in honor of Black History Month, I'll be hosting a conversation with playwright, actress, and director June Carroll. Incredibly talented lady, and who will share with us some of what her experiences as a Black woman have been working in theater. And trust me, she's amazing. I've really been enjoying getting to know her for that program. All right, so that's only what's coming up on Cultural Thursdays. Lots of other stuff going on. I encourage you to check out our website and see what we've got. Housekeeping for today's program. During the program, I will mute everyone's microphones, but you are welcome, of course, to use the chat function as much as you like for questions or comments. We'll actually take the questions at the end of the formal presentation, and you'll be able to unmute your microphones at that time, as well as using the chat for your questions. Let's see. The other thing, for those of you not as familiar with Zoom, if you find that your camera, that the screen is starting to freeze a little bit, or you're having problems with audio, then I suggest you turn off your own camera. You'll still be able to see the presentation. That may help you with the bandwidth. All right, so now to the program. Our guest today is Michael E. Stern, photographer, artist, and teacher with a career that spans more than 4 decades. A graduate. Yeah, see, there you go. He started before he was born.
Thank you. Thank you.
A graduate of Art Center, he's worked in advertising and promotion, including a long collaboration with Disney. In 2009, he came out with his first book, Build a Better Photograph, a Disciplined Approach to Creativity. FYI, that's also the name of his website, buildabetterphotograph.com, which you will all want to go to after this presentation, because he's got a lot of amazing photographs and documentaries on there for your enjoyment. So buildabetterphotograph.com. In recent years, he's combined traditional time-lapse industrial photography with human interest stories about the builders and creators, adding the human element to the technology. Today, Michael will share with us his documentary about the construction of the historic arbor in the Rose Garden at Huntington, and also talk with us about the making of the film. So I'm now going to unspotlight myself and spotlight Michael, and we will, let's see, where are we? I'm just gonna, there we go, spotlight you. So Take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Annie, for that wonderful introduction. I'm so impressed with myself all over again. Thank you all for attending the screening today. I'm looking forward to showing it to you. Give you a little background on the film. In New Year's Eve 2011, I was at a party, and the host had someone he wanted me to meet. Turns out that this fellow was working at the Huntington restoring the Faux Bois concrete structures in the Japanese garden, and then he was going to make his way to the Rose Garden. I was working doing a time lapse film of the building of the tea house and the restoration of the Japanese house. So we met at this party, found out we were both working at the Huntington together, and on subsequent visits to each other's work area, because at the time we were both working at the Huntington 3 to 4 days a week, we hatched a plan to film the process of him restoring one of these trees. There were 100 trees that he had to restore. They were built in 1915, and they were deteriorating. And I asked him how long it would take him to get to the last tree on his list, and he said it would take him about 3 years. So we had 3 years to get together and figure out how we're going to film it, and then to work on Jim Folsom, the just retired director of the Huntington Botanical side, work on him to get the funding and the okay. And as I watched Terry's process, I was impressed with how meticulous he was and how practiced he was at doing all the little things, removing the old concrete, building a new armature, building a new shape, filling it with concrete, and then sculpting the tree-like bark. So it was quite an education for me as well to learn about this process. And one of the things that was interesting is at the time I was doing strictly time-lapse filmmaking, no video, no audio, just time-lapse filmmaking. And the idea was to do this as a 3-minute time-lapse only called Zero to Hero. And Jim had a limited budget, and Terry agreed that he could do a tree in about 6 weeks. And I figured I could edit it in about 4 weeks. So we had about $8,000 for my budget for a 10-week job. It wasn't great money, but it was certainly fine. And I agreed to do it. And I'd done a lot of work for the Huntington at that point. The first day of filming, Jim Folsom came out to say hi to Terry and I. And he said, make sure you get a lot of video of all the stuff that Terry does to sculpt and make the bark texture. Well, that right there blew the budget to pieces. And I agreed to it, of course, because he's the client. And the 6-week work that Terry said he could do the tree in turned into 7 months. And the 4 weeks that I thought that I could do the editing in turned into 11 months. So a 10-week job went to 18 months. And it became a labor of love. And it was so much fun to collaborate with Terry, and he would do things and repeat the process over and over again. And I had the opportunity to film the same thing multiple times from different camera angles, different camera moments. I was always shooting video and time lapse simultaneously. So it was quite a process to collect all the data. And Jim, to his credit, did find some more money for me after the fact, which was fine. And it was 18 months of our lives to do this film. I commissioned original music. I met a local artist here in Pasadena, and she's playing the, it's not a ukulele, but it's something similar. I can't remember the name now. And then I worked with a composer in Italy, Stefano, who composed most of the score. So it's actually the first time I've commissioned original music. And this is the first real documentary. Most of my films up to that point had been 3 to 5 minutes long. So this film is just under 25 minutes. And I learned an awful lot about recording audio on location, which I'd never done before, and directing somebody who was certainly open to being directed, but still, if you haven't done it before, it's an interesting process. And we all put it together, and it premiered November of 2018 at the Huntington, and to great success. And it's an infotainment type of thing. It's a documentary to preserve the process that Terry developed in restoring this Faux Bois. Basically, it's an environmental structure spread out over 100 trees. And we tried to make it interesting and put a little humor in there, so there's a human interest angle to it, and it's not just about, you know, a concrete tree. And overall, it was a tremendous experience for both of us, and I hope you enjoy the film. And if you have any questions afterwards, I'm certainly happy to answer them.
Okay, so Pete, whenever you're ready, if you want to roll the film. And by the way, folks, it's about 25 minutes long, and then we'll come back afterwards and talk with Michael further about the film and about his career.
Wonderful.
Arbors in his Japanese garden. Using native oak logs and timbers, they captured the casual charm of nature he so loved, but they didn't last long. The next year, on a trip to Paris, he and his wife Arabella encountered 50-year-old examples of Faux Bois, the French decorative art that made imitation wood structures by combining barrel bands, iron rods, wire mesh, and concrete. Perhaps inspired by this and encouraged by Arabella, Mr. Huntington began building his Faux Bois arbor in 1915. 95 years later, Terence Egan begins restoring these historic, aged structures. This is the story of one such tree.
You can see here and from the cracks, but also even just from a wire brush, that hollow sound. And the moss that you see that's growing on it, that's from 100 years of collecting dirt and moss. So we're going to take this and see where it ends. And where it ends, like this, that's the good stuff I can fix. The objective is find the good stuff I can fix, the stuff that hasn't failed yet, and everything that's failed I can take away. This is what I'm going to make. I have this fiber mesh on top of metal mesh. And to get there, I've loaded a pastry bag with building adhesive. And I squirt that onto the fiber mesh. I flip the mesh over onto the metal. And then another piece of poly film goes on. And it doesn't stick to the film, so the next day I have several sandwiches built up of these panels that I can then use. Once I've got these two meshes put together, I can bend my shape to a kind of random form that looks kind of almost tree-like or sculptural. And then it's kind of a very free way of making that kind of pattern. So when I'm making this shape on a tree, for example, I have these two meshes working together. And because they're working together, I can then use my pastry bag filled with grout and run stripes across it. And those stripes will stiffen up this floppy form enough to be able to do a fluid pour of concrete behind it. And in this way, I don't have to make rebar into the shape of the shapes that I want for a tree. My shape for a tree can come out of the mesh because the mesh is reinforced enough through the grout process that I'm using to hold it together and hold its shape. You know, when people are tying rebar for sidewalks and most concrete construction, they're not tying it this way. They're not spending as much time making wraps. But in my case, I want this thing to function like a weld before the concrete is surrounding it. It needs to be strong to support the mud because I don't have any other form. This is the form. This is the support for the form. Probably before I even get to the mesh, I'll come in with a pastry bag filled with grout, and I'll place spots of that grout, all of these connects that are be hard to reach with a pour. Get in there with grout, inject it a bit, and so it'll be fewer traps for moisture, fewer places for future failure. Considering the failure that I'm looking at, I'm using the inside of what's made it fail after the first 100 years to inform how I'm building it for the next 100. The essence of all of this sewing is to make the mesh suspended away from the rebar so that I have a good distance away from the rebar to get good penetration around the rebar of the concrete that I'm going to place. The reason that I'm here is because it failed because it was trapping water, and anything I do here to make sure that it doesn't trap water around the steel is a bonus over where it was 100 years ago. So I'm putting a chicken wire mesh up here after I've got my bones, the rebar, in place. The mesh is going to give me an idea of what the shape of this thing is relative to everything else before I commit myself with all this other mesh. I've kind of got a form there, but I need to know the form of the body. Like, what is this? How big does this want to be? Is it in the right place relative to the piece on the other side? That's why I have this wire in place. I've got a bead on that, and I can drape this chicken wire skin, like a taxidermy skin, onto the bones of the rebar. I can look at it from down below where we're going to see it from the pathway. And because this mesh is so organic in shape and in form, just to throw it up there like materials jazz, it's going to suggest things to me. It's already suggesting me to have a limb that goes off and does this and breaks right there. And it already suggests to me that something open at the bottom where you get to see something like a knot, a knurl, a place where a branch broke off like there. And it can swoop down here, get skinny and fat again, and then a branch to start this branch. And I hadn't thought of that before. So this is the first tie on the next piece of rebar. I've got one end of it tied right here. Now I can go down to the other end, bend that to as short as I want that end, and that's established that in lengths. So it could take, probably 10-15 minutes to get this all bent and tied in place. Let's see. I'm not a very good predictor of time. That's my problem. Well, it is not a problem. That's a problem. My problem? I don't know. All right, I'm squeezing material in here to find all the nooks and crannies that I missed with my pour from the other side. I'm pressurizing my material. It's a pretty fluid mixture, and I'm pressurizing my material with the pastry bag, as well as kind of slapping it through there. I'm burping it. I'm burping all the air out of it as I go. And I know there's air there on this surface right where this stopped that I want to get to make solid. So I got my cutters here. I can open this up a little bit like so. Get my nozzle in there and squirt. Oh, look at that. So you see it's pumping up in here. It's filling all of that just with the pressure I'm putting on this one port. So it's gotten all the way up to the other material and it's pressurizing. So I'm applying this layer over the top of the metal mesh. And this is the layer that goes ahead of my sculpting layer. And I'm applying it to make sure that all of my metal is covered, so that when I do some sculpting to the next layer, there's no way I can get down and reveal any of the metal. It's all been covered in this step. This trick with the nail came to me by looking at some of these old pieces one day. And I was really puzzled over how the master was able to make this pattern so consistently inconsistent over 100 trees. And in the first few months, I just didn't know how he did it. And I was puzzled over it and getting close enough to the product that everybody said, oh, this is great, just keep going. But I wasn't pleased with it enough, and I knew I had to find his trick. So one day I was keeping these pieces that come off of the old trees in my car, and I was looking at it, sitting at a light, turning it every which way, and I'm looking down the valley, and I'm seeing this groove, and in that groove, I see the pattern of a T shape. In this groove, there's this T shape right here, and it just told me right away that it was a nail. When I saw that pattern, I got a box of nails. It was game on. I had unlocked this 90-year-old secret. I have a piece of a scrub brush that I run through a bandsaw so I can get a section of it. And I get a section because I want to use the sides of the brush and be able to get close to the thing, to be able to make it and drag to get these finer lines in it. It's also this step where I tap it sideways like this. It's pushing the material down into and making it well adhered before I start sculpting with it. But I can get so many things out of it with different ways that I hold it or push it or drag it, that it's among my favorite things to work with, is just this brush. So sometimes I will use the end of it. I can splay it with my thumb, forefinger, and get just a few hairs and push and drag and pull and lift, and everything takes on a different, all the different moves take on a different shape, and it really feels more like dancing than it does like sculpting. And that's that one.
Okay, well, I think that we'll allow everybody to unmute themselves and and give a round of applause for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pretty
Beautiful job.
Thank you.
pretty amazing. And let me I'm gonna spotlight you again here, Michael.
There I am in all my glory.
So that was that was really tremendous. Always, I'd watched it before, and it still blows my mind.
Yes, it was a little jumpy on my end. And, you know, unfortunately, with time lapse and sound syncing together, it's really important. Timing is everything. And if it was a little jumpy on your end, maybe go and watch it with a direct connection, and it'll be a little smoother for you. But it was good.
So as I'd said earlier, it's available on his website, which is buildabetterphotograph.com, and you go to media, I believe is the link.
It's actually under my blog.
Ah,
And the title of the blog post is "Taking Something Broken and Making It Beautiful Again."
okay.
Is it available at the Huntington?
Pardon me?
Is it available through the Huntington?
The film?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's not. Politics reared its ugly head over there, and for reasons that I'm not privy to, they are not showing it on their website.
Okay.
We could do a whole nother meeting just on that, but let's not.
Yeah. So would you? I'm trying to find the link here, and so I can put it in the chat. There we go. Okay.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah. So let's see. We'll start. I'm trying to navigate all these things. So if you have a question, it's easiest to start off by putting it in the chat. Otherwise, we can there we go, buildabetterphotograph.com. So I have a couple of questions just about making the film.
Okay.
I don't think we already covered this. Pardon me if you said it, but how many people besides yourself and Terry worked on the making of the film?
Well, that was it, except for the two musicians I commissioned for the sound, for the music. And then there was a special effects artist that did the end graphics for me. But that was all outside of the filming. It was really just Terry and I.
So you did all the shooting and all the editing?
I did all the shooting, all the editing, and lugging all my equipment from the upper area down. You know, this tree was at the very far end of the rose garden. It wasn't near the parking lot. It was at the very, very far end. If I thought about that, I would have shot it a lot sooner. But the reason that I wanted to wait until Terry got to the end is that allowed for me to do 360 degrees around the tree and get cameras up high as well. It was not going to interfere with me wanting to put cameras in any particular spot. So that was really the main reason why we waited.
And how long did it take you to do, to make the film after what was your post-production on this?
Well, the actual Terry promised me that he could do the tree in 6 weeks, and it took him 7 months. And part of it was he'd never been filmed before, and he kind of made the tree a lot bigger than he originally planned. And so it just sort of kept growing. And then he wanted to put the owl in there. Jim had encouraged him to put his little signature somewhere on the tree so people knew it was Terry. And Terry had done that with little things like putting a little rodent door at the base of one of the trees. And if you look some of the trees at certain times of day, you can see faces in the sculpting. So he wanted to put this owl in there at the end and asked me, should I ask Jim if I can do it? And I said, no, just do it and then ask for forgiveness if he's not happy with it. So him deciding about the owl and him sculpting the owl took about a month just for him to figure that part out. And then I thought I was going to be able to cut this together in 4 weeks based on a 6-week shooting schedule, and I spent 11 months editing. Now, part of it is that film was 25 minutes long. I have enough footage that I could make a 2-hour film, and nobody would watch it, not even my mother, right? So, you know, it's better to have it, not need it, than need it, not have it. So you shoot a lot of extra footage. There's lots of really great sequences that we made that while on their own are really great, they would just slow down the flow of the film. So as a filmmaker, you know, you can't be so in love with your pictures, with your shots, that you'll include it and kill the overall vibe of the film. You know, the idea behind editing is a process of removal. How little can I include in this film and still tell the story and push the narrative along? So I you know, it killed me to put to remove some of these sequences from the film, but I have to be true to the story and not get my ego in it any more than it has to be involved. And so you know, I'm going to do some blog posts in the future and include some of these sequences, because just from a purely time-lapse standpoint, they're quite impressive in terms of how far the camera moved and traveled during the shot and what Terry was accomplishing in that time frame.
We have a couple of questions on the chat about the arbor itself, but I want to ask you one more question about your film before we go into those bits.
Okay.
Can you explain the process of time-lapse photography? And how many, is it really a million still pictures? And how do you turn that into a video?
For this film, I shot 50,000 pictures, 147 video clips. And I spent about 800 hours putting it all together. Time lapse compresses time. So you're taking something that maybe happens over a year period of time and you're compressing it down to a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes or something like that. One of the things that we try to think about is the motion picture business has done a great job of having our attention span be between 90 seconds and 3 minutes vis-a-vis their film previews that they show. So having a time-lapse film longer than that, it really has to have a lot of reasons to be longer than 3 minutes. It's too hard to watch on the eyes. That's also why I incorporate video into the time-lapse, to kind of give you a break from that frenetic pacing of time-lapse. But you're basically, if Terry is doing something over a 20-minute time period, and so that is 1,200 seconds. And if I am outputting at 30 frames a second, 1,200 divided by 30 is 400. So I need 400 pictures taken in that 20 minutes to get the sequence that I need at the frame output that I want. It's just really a math problem. Now, the other way to think about it is I have a 7-second sequence that I need to fit into my timeline, and 7 times 30 is 210. So 210 pictures at 30 frames a second is 7 seconds of footage. So I would just have to record 210 pictures, and then that would fit into my timeline, into my film, and fill that 7-second block. So there's a lot of filmmakers that figure out the timing ahead of time and then calculate their math and make their pictures based on something that's preconceived. I'm reacting in real time to what Terry is doing. I am understanding what his process is, how long it's going to take, and I'm just really filming as long as it takes. And if I'm filming for an hour or I'm filming for 10 minutes, if I get 1,000 pictures or only 400, you know, I get what I get and I make it work. So I'm not trying to go in with any preconceived notions. The first film I did for the Huntington, when they built the tea house in 2011, in 5 months, I shot 100,000 pictures. I had never done a time lapse before, and I didn't know what I was doing. And so I was like a squirrel gathering nuts for the winter, running around, getting as much footage as I possibly could, because I didn't really know what I was doing. They didn't know it at the Huntington that I didn't know what I was doing.
Did you like set up a tripod or something and bring the camera every day, or did you just leave it there over 6?
Well, the shot that showed the full tree from that sort of faraway view, that was attached to a post that ran the entire 7 months. So Dave McLaren, since I've done 14 films for the Huntington, he puts posts in the ground where I'd like them. And then I have a jig that I made that attaches to the post, and then the camera mounting bracket attaches to the jig, and then I put the camera on the bracket. And it's run on solar power. So the solar panel charges the battery inside the housing that runs the camera. And since I was on site 4 or 5 days a week, I would just check the camera to make sure it was working. So I have cameras that go up permanently for the duration of a job. And then when I show up on site, I do what's called rover footage. I'll bring 6 or 7 extra cameras, set up the tripod, set up the motion control systems. These are devices that move the camera in space as it's recording. Either the camera travels up or travels down, goes left or right or at a diagonal. I also put a camera, there was a shot above going the entire length of the tree, and Terry was doing the rebar work. I put a camera on the end of a boom and just rolled it down the concrete sidewalk to get that sort of overhead look. So I have 14 cameras and 23 lenses. So I bring bags and bags of stuff, and I don't really know what I'm going to do. I know what my 2 favorite cameras are, and I know that I want to put the camera in motion. But other than that, I understand, Terry educated me as to what his process was. We talked about best camera angles for filming, and sometimes we film something. I come back at night in my office. I don't like the way the footage looks, so I go back out there and reshoot it. And since filling the bags with grout and squeezing them onto the tree, he did that probably 300 times on that one tree alone, and he did 100 trees over 8 years. So he was very practiced. It's a lot of repetitive stuff. The thing with the nail and sculpting the bark, he did that for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I'm like a kid in a candy store. I get to pick what I want to film. So it was a very collaborative process, and I didn't mind that it went longer because we were getting something good. And I don't know if any of you know Jim Folsom personally, but he's a wonderful person, and he's a great supporter of the arts. And he hires people like me and Terry, and then stands back and lets us do our job. And he's just an ideal client to work for. And as hard work as it was fun to do that every day. And to see all the people that walked by the Huntington and stopped to talk to Terry, and he would hold court with all these people asking questions. And it was fascinating to see him educate these people, people from other countries, young kids, older people. And it was just a joyous process to be part of.
Well, I was one of the people who stopped and talked to Terry while he was working, because I had become a big fan of a Faux Bois installation in Little Rock, Arkansas. Mm-hmm. So you weren't working that day because I didn't see a photographer, but he was so generous to talk to. I mean, just really a lovely guy.
Well, there was a little bit of a downside to that, because when I set up a motion control system and I start a sequence, I can't interrupt the sequence. And I would tell Terry, okay, Terry, I'm going to start rolling camera here. If someone comes by, do not stop and talk to them. And he would listen about half the time. And Terry, come on. No. And I put traffic cones up at either end of the tree. And when I would see people walking down, I said, no, go away. And, there's no sound recording in a time lapse. So you don't hear me. There were several times it's like, Terry, dude, ignore the people for once. You got to focus on me. We got to get this sequence in the can today. It's due today. So that was kind of a little bit of a thorn in my side, but you got to take it in stride, because you're not curing cancer or saving the world. We're just telling a story. So you got to keep it in perspective.
So a couple of the questions, Florine was asking how many years the work will last. He talks about another 100 years. Is that what he's looking at?
Well, yes, but the French invented the rebar and the chicken wire concept with this whole faux bois, but they didn't use fluid pours of concrete. So there are lots of pockets between the concrete and the rebar, and rust got in there, and that's why they deteriorated. So his process, that's why he went with the grout bags to make these fluid pours to get the concrete into all the nooks and crannies, so moisture will not get in there. I'd be surprised if they didn't last twice as long. But of course, by the time they wear out, we're going to be 3D printing trees. The process of concrete is not going to, so it's kind of funny that it's done as a historical document for future generations if they have to repair the trees, but we won't even be using concrete in 100 years probably. So
Well, and one of the questions from Riva is, what's their need for elaborate art like this? And how many people in the United States can do what Terry does?
Yeah.
less than 6 probably. And the whole idea with Henry Huntington, he really liked nature, and if the oak arbors, the natural timbers, had not rotted, he wouldn't have thought about replacing them. And when he and Arabella were in Paris, they came across this Faux Bois garden, and that's kind of what inspired them to put that in at the Huntington. And the master that they brought over, after about 85 trees, he disappears from the historical record, and some apprentice took over the rest of the trees. And there's no documentation, no pictures. It was Terry and me sleuthing to try to find some of this information. So we're not 100% sure about, was it really an apprentice that took over from the master? Did the master retire? Did he go back overseas? Did he die? There's just no documentation. So it was important for Jim to build this content, this document, for people to appreciate this lost art.
And it's quite fascinating. And when I first talked to you about doing this, and I watched the documentary, and then I went online and looked up Faux Bois and read the long history of it. So anyone who wants a deep dive, just Google Faux Bois, and and it really has a fascinating history as an art. So one of the other questions Judith asks, and I have to say I echo, so in addition to the owl, what else should we be looking for in the arbor?
Other than the faces on some of the trees between the last tree and the walkway that goes down to the bell and into the arroyo to the Japanese house, he didn't put anything else in besides that. In one of the trees, about 4 trees up from that tree that I filmed, there's a little door with a little leaf doormat. And when kids come by, Terry tells them that there's a little creature in there, knock on the door and see if he's home. He was fairly timid about that. And since this was the last tree, he went for it with the owl. And it was, it made him nervous because he wasn't sure if Jim was going to like it or not. And Jim loved it. It was like, it's about time you put some signature piece on there for you. Jim always, encourages me to put my name on everything. And some of the other films that I've done for the Huntington, people higher up in administration don't show those films because my name's on it. And it's kind of weird because Jim supports artists, but administration doesn't support artists.
And who is Jim again?
Jim Folsom just recently retired. He'd been there 36 years, and he was director of botanical.
A botanical. Okay, I knew I remembered then.
Yeah, so he's the reason the gardens are so expansive and beautiful. It was really something he pushed for. And so it was a great experience working directly with him. I noticed a couple other questions about the equipment. 35 millimeter DSLRs, GoPro cameras, and my iPhone. So you don't need elaborate tools, but you do need to understand composition and framing and lighting. And, I kind of see the story in my head as far as how a particular scene is going to play out. What's the movement? When I'm shooting something, I'm paying attention to the scene before that scene occurs and how that scene ends and goes into the next scene. So you're always trying to connect the end of one scene to the beginning of another. And if you're coming from video to time lapse, that connection is a specific way. Going from time lapse to time lapse, that connection is a specific way. So I have to be very conscious. And that's also partly why I shoot time lapse and video at the same time with different cameras. So if my video to video doesn't work so well, maybe the video to time lapse works better. But it gives me an option in the editing bay to figure out what's best that will serve the story.
Do you keep extensive notes? How do you, I mean, how do you file? How do you create the puzzle for your editing?
I use Lightroom as my database for all the video and the photography clips, and they're all identified by date, and then folders are labeled by date, the camera, and the motion control system. So at a glance, when I have, so you figure 7 months is what, 28 weeks, and 5 days times 28 weeks is what, over 100 folders. So there's over 100 dates in there. And at a glance, I can go right to what I want to get to. And then I have 37 pages of edit notes I made. So as I review the footage and get a feel for what the footage is telling me, I'm making edit notes and how I might be able to connect the parts together. And then that's at least a starting point. You know, I probably saw this film 300 times in the course of editing it. And I'm so tuned into it. And I do that with all my films. If there's like on a time lapse sequence, somebody could be in the picture and a moment later they're gone. But when that plays back in the time lapse, it looks like a blip and it can be distracting. So I'll go back into my folder and search for that one picture out of the 300 in the folder and remove it. And it's like, you know, plucking hairs or something. You're looking for one little thing that's distracting. And it's a very tedious process. And when my wife starts referring to me as Mr. Stern, I know I'm spending too much time in the office and not at home. But you know, it's an art form I cultivate, and it's just an extension of me and my storytelling abilities.
Were you, here's another question from Tom. Were you working on other projects during these 11 months?
Oh, yes.
And how do you keep them straight in your head?
Lots of notes. I keep lots of journals. I'm very big on establishing a folder for the project and putting notes in there. I have legal pad on my desk. I'm making notes, and I just have to keep track of it that way. At my peak, I was doing 3 time-lapse films simultaneously, and that got a little confusing. But I was doing some still documentation jobs while filming this, so I didn't have a lot of other heavy lifting jobs that I was doing.
Are you working on projects now?
Yes, I've been documenting the Crenshaw line, the light rail line that's being built for LA Metro. I've been on that for 4 years, documenting it. And then that same contractor is building a streetcar system down in Orange County that I've been on that project. I guess July will be 2 years I've been on that. And then I'm doing some family portrait work and a lot of teaching and consulting. So I'm kind of near the tail end of my career. I've been at it 41 years. So I'm kind of sort of segueing into the role of elder statesman and helping younger photographers figure out, you know, not only how to do photography, but why they're doing it. Why are you struck by a certain visual? What appeals to you? Is it color or tone? Do you like people or landscapes? You know, what is your why? What drives me is I've always been fascinated by people who build and the specialized machines that are made to do a specific task, like drill a certain hole in a certain type of rock material or spray concrete out of a 1,000-foot hose or whatever it might be. I think building is fascinating. And as a kid, I played trucks and dirt in the backyard for hours. And it was, and when I look back, it makes sense that I'm attracted to construction. I just think it's a fascinating process. And you know, Terry's was a little bit more of a fine art thing, but it was construction nonetheless. It was 600 pounds of concrete that he put into that tree. And I don't know how many hundreds of pounds of rebar it was, but It was, I like doing this stuff. I just think it's fascinating.
Do you ever do quote unquote fine art photography?
I certainly do. And I'm so glad you asked that. Yes.
Oh, where can we view your art, Michael?
Well, yes, it's not online. Well, it is online. If you go to blurb, blurb.com, and search for my name and the word remnants, remnants. In fact, this is the cover of the book. What I'm doing is I'm finding object. This is a butterfly wing that would fit on your thumbnail, and the line is a human hair. And I got involved in decaying bits of organic detritus, leaves, wings, hair, seeds, grass, what have you. And I scan them on a 3D, on a desktop scanner, and I make this artwork. Let me show you one more. This is another one.
Whoa.
So that is a rusty screw and a bone. And
Hold it up closer. Yeah, so they can see the texture of the bone.
Oh.
so
And
I've done about 600.
Hold the owl pellet one, Michael.
The owl pellet?
Yeah, do you have it on the wall?
Oh.
That's really cool.
That was my wife speaking.
And hold it still.
Yes, do.
Oh,
Oh my
it's too
goodness.
blurry.
We
So
had
we-
some owls in our palm trees, and he collected a whole bunch of the pellets.
Oh.
And then I put them on my flatbed scanner and closed the lid, and they all exploded.
Oh.
And this was the result. So my personal art form is scanning bits of detritus before their existence ends. I have no idea why. I'm not psychologically disturbed.
Have you been doing any kind of a survey of all of the masks left on the ground?
Yeah, no, I hadn't, but thanks for that suggestion. I hadn't thought about that.
I thought if I'd started that 10 months ago, I'd have quite a collection.
Well, I did go around doing pandemic portraits. Last year, in my neighborhood, I went around, and families that wanted portraits on their front porch, I would do for them. So I was masked up, but they were not, unless they wanted to. Portraiture has sort of been my first love, and I'm kind of getting back around to it finally after all this time.
Well, and when you and I talked, you said that you had done a lot of product photography.
Yes.
That's almost portrait photography in a way, isn't it?
Well, you are trying to find the best side of something and display it as best you can. But the challenge of people is unpredictable, and kids are great because they're guileless.
Yeah.
It's easy to get them to smile, and folks past a certain age are easy because they've been through a whole lot and they don't need to play this game anymore. But you got that group in the middle from about age 15 to maybe 50. They're difficult. So
all right, well, I think
we
we'll
answer all the
we'll
questions?
wind this down. So if anybody has any other questions, they put in the chat or just voice it out. And anything else about yourself and your work you'd like to share, Michael?
Oh, I probably said too much already.
Never.
Well, no, I thank you folks for staying on the call and attending. I really appreciate that. As an artist, it's always gratifying to have an audience. It's important, even though we're sort of secure in the work we're doing. If it resonates with other people, it becomes doubly meaningful. So I appreciate that.
And are you still in touch with Terry? And what's he working on now?
Oh, yes. No, Terry and I keep in touch. He's working on a public art project in Long Beach right now. And then I think today he told me that he's starting at Ferndale or Fern Glen, Ferndale Park, I think it's called.
Oh, at Griffith Park.
In Griffith Park. All the handrails are falling apart.
Yes, right.
So he got a commission to fix that. So he starts that today, he was telling me. And then as I was telling you earlier, Annie, the Fine Arts Club of Pasadena is a social club started in, I think, 1907 through Caltech. The wife of the president of Caltech at the time started this social club to bring artists and creativity exposure to the scientists and teachers working there. So they honored the film at one of their virtual meetings in December. So Terry and I got a little bit of a celebrity thing going there. So that was fun. But Terry's a true artist, and funny, I don't think he'll mind me telling this story. When we met at that New Year's Eve party, we got to talking, and he was kind of upset. He described himself as a turtle on his back flailing away because he knew he was not being paid enough for the work he was doing, and he didn't know how to fix it. And of course, he's a true pure artist that's kind of weak on the business side, and I'm an artist that's been able to sort of make a business work. And I was telling him, you gotta ask for this much money minimum at least. And he finally, after talking to me, he went over to Jim and he said, Jim, I have to raise my rate. I think he was charging $35 an hour at the time. He said, I have to raise it to $65 an hour. He'd been there about a year and a half at that point. And Jim said, well, it's about time. I didn't figure out how you could work so cheap, for crying out loud. And most artists undervalue themselves, and they're very timid when it comes to advocating for themselves. So I'm glad I was able to help them do that. And that kind of brought us closer together. And but there's a downside. You can't raise it too much or too often, because then there's always the other side of that. But
yeah, I love the story.
Yeah. And anyway, so thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure. Look forward to everything else you do. And
me too. Me too.
So just keep in touch. You're a senior center member, right?
I'm not a member per se. I've been lurking on some of your Tuesday things, but
You're supposed to say not yet.
Not yet. Well, I just want to say something that this past Saturday, I got my Medicare card.
Oh, good.
So Linda had a question.
Yes.
So Linda?
I'm sorry, I couldn't make chat work, but I always look at the Faux Bois at the Huntington, and I say Walt Disney must have come there, seen it, because I see Faux Bois at Disneyland. And I think in the introduction they said you worked at Disney, and I wondered if you had ever made that same observation.
Yes, actually. So a couple things. I actually was a preferred vendor for Disney for 20 years. So they kept my dance card filled for a long time with photography work. And there were several WDI Imagineers who made regular treks to watch Terry work. And the rock-like effects in Cars Land was done a little bit prior to Terry, but subsequent things that they put in at Disneyland and Disney World, the Imagineers had talked to Terry and did understand some of his techniques. I don't know if he actually consulted with them, but there wasn't a real connection between what Disney's did, and because the timing doesn't match up. But I was there a couple of times when Imagineers were there talking to him. So they were certainly doing a lot of their research and just getting more information on technique. Mostly what Disney was doing prior to talking to Terry in terms of getting a tree bark effect is they were casting it and doing it out of plastic, and it was something that was done via computer and to making the molds. So Terry showed them the nail trick, and they changed their process and how they create realistic looking bark. so that they're
Well,
actually.
I'm gonna jump in with a little bit of completely a little bit out of left field trivia. Is that for those of you who grew up in the area and remember Clifton's Cafeteria on Broadway?
Yes.
There's Faux Bois at Clifton's Cafeteria.
Yes, yes.
And Disney Imagineers were eating at Clifton's in the 50s. So Clifton's Brookdale, which started looking like that in I think 1936, was actually it's a verified thing that informed Disney. So the Faux Bois process, which as you said is really French from I think the 18th century, that has been used many times and at Clifton's, and Disney was at Clifton's, and that translates to Disneyland. And some of their Faux Bois is out of fiberglass, and I don't know if that counts as Faux Bois.
Well, Faux Bois is
Probably not.
false. It's false wood is what it means. So whether it's concrete or fiberglass, I don't know. But actually, while we were having our first Civil War in the 1860s is when the French had developed this technique. So what is that, mid-19th century?
Yeah.
So, and you know, because that's kind of when concrete, rebar, chicken wire, barrel bands, the things that they were experimenting with. And then Arkansas, as you mentioned, is a big center for Faux Bois in this country.
Yeah, it's an amazing installation in Little Rock. So go around the country and find the Faux Bois and salute the artists that still do it.
And you can also buy it. You can also buy it at Martha Stewart. She has a whole Faux Bois collection.
Oh.
She actually came out to the Huntington and talked with Terry before she launched her Faux Bois line, so that she was getting some feedback from the artist himself. So
I just want one of his owls. That's all.
they're for sale. He has them, so he he kept the mold, so they're there. You know, that was just one last story about the owl. You know, that the place where he cast it, where we filmed those scenes, he used to work there many years ago. So he made a deal with them and they cast, I think, 6 owls for him. And they didn't use the concrete that Terry spec'd. So if you look at the owl that's in that tree at the Huntington, you know, it's designed for people to touch, and it's already wearing off. The claws on the owl have shrunk a little bit. And it's kind of a sore spot with Terry. So if you see him, don't tell him I told you. But he wanted a harder, I don't know what the term is, but he wanted harder concrete because he knew that was going to happen. So he may have to break that thing out and put a new one in a few years.
Oh gosh.
I remember there is also Faux Bois in Walt Disney Concert Hall on the rooftop garden.
Did not know that. That's great.
Yes.
Well, now we all know to look for it.
It doesn't need watering. It never grows, so it's great for your garden.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think that we'll wrap this up then. So thank you so much, Michael. It was a real pleasure. Thank you all for joining us for this. Hope to see you next week and in the future. And we'll be seeing you, Michael, as well. So thanks very
everybody.
much.
Really appreciate your time. Thank you for your comments. Bye-bye.